Wrongful, the director of the Vanguard, and I'm very excited for what we're going to bring to you today. So I want to welcome everyone. This is our 10th annual Vanguard fundraiser, and I really have no idea how we got to 10 years. I also don't know how we quite got to where we are in the world. I'm sure everybody here has a story of this year, and I will admit that I was kind of skeptical about this whole COVID thing. I'm not into government conspiracies. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There's a whole bunch of real stuff that the government does in plain view. So we don't need to invent conspiracies. But every time it seemed like we got warned about one of these pandemics, it didn't seem like it amounted to much. For me, the reality hit home when they shut down the NBA season. Now you might say, wait a second, what's wrong with this guy? Like, is he so bent on the NBA that his world crumbles when they cancel the NBA? And no, it's really not about that. I like sports as much as the next guy, maybe more than the next guy, but I don't live and die by the NBA season. It was simply the acknowledgement that reality was hitting home. Hey man, they just shut down the NBA. And so this was big. And at that moment, I was at a low point. We had done all this work. We were excited to have Mark Godsey come here to talk. We had gotten UC Davis to basically comp us the UC Davis Convention Center to be able to host this event on this day. And it got all shut down. And so here I was, this work that I had put in since 2006, and I felt like I was looking into the abyss. And I know what a lot of small business owners are going through because I went through it myself, especially in my own mind. But, the amazing thing about this year is that it turns out that we were already set up for the pivot in this world. We're an online organization, and the virtual world works to our advantage with its online presence. And so suddenly, we went from being a very small organization that was localized to Northern California to an organization that was able to reach across the state and actually across the country. And instead of having a few pockets of interns in places like Woodland and San Francisco, we have 60 interns right now. Instead of focusing our work on 3 counties in Northern California, we're no longer limited in time or space. And so we've been able to do things we could only dream about before, and we're that much closer to being able to fulfill our vision of being able to shine a light on courtrooms across the state and across the country to expose everyday injustice. So I get this question a lot. How does an upper middle class, college educated, Jewish white man who's not a lawyer, not a journalist by trade either, get involved in things like police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, and wrongful convictions? So for those of you out there who have been to our first 9 of these, or some of the first 9, you know that I've had 2 real clear moments of clarity in the last 15 years. One of those led me to start the Vanguard in 2006, and the other led me to create the Court Watch Project in 2010. So I'll briefly tell you the story of Ajay Dev. It was about this time in 2009 when I got a call from a family to go out to their home east of Sacramento. Their loved one had been convicted of a horrific crime, and they didn't think he had done it. And at this point, I didn't honestly know what a wrongful conviction was. I had heard about the Innocence Project, and here we had a really horrible story. Ajay was accused and convicted of raping his adopted daughter over a 5-year period. He'd been convicted of 76 felony counts. I listened to the family's story, but I was skeptical. But I did agree to go to court, and I watched his sentencing hearing. And on August 9, 2009, so just about 11 years ago to the day, he was sentenced to a 378-year sentence. Now, at this point, I had no idea if he was innocent or not. But I was convinced that 378 years was unjust. It took several years and going through the appellate brief and working through the facts of the case before I came to the conclusion that a grave injustice had been done. An innocent man had been taken from his wife and his sons and put into prison. And this, is not the typical case either. This was a well-educated, middle-class family who was able to afford well-paid, highly competent attorneys. And yet, in the end, he really stood no chance. As my friend Bill Bostic would say, it could happen to you. And as Martin Luther King once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. And so out of this case, we created our first court watch. And it doesn't resemble what we have today. We had 5 interns. We were meeting at the Davis Roundtable Pizza because we didn't have any office space. But even from the start, we were exposing horrible stories like a man who was facing 25 years to life for stealing a package of shredded cheese before we blew up the story. And our story that we covered ended up being covered in the New York Times and the Guardian of London. So we're still trying to get Ajay Dev out. His petition for habeas got him an evidentiary hearing, but that's been on hold for the last almost year now, thanks in part to COVID, but also in part to more prosecutorial misconduct from the DA's office. In addition, they are trying to get him commuted by the governor. And so they have a change.org petition. I just put the link into the chat. And if you hit the link, you can sign that petition. So far, I'm told 1,900 people have now signed the petition. So hopefully that will help influence the governor to set Ajay free, to send him back to his family where he belongs, to get him out of harm's way of the prison system. In addition, during the course of my work, I've gotten to know a number of people impacted by the system. One of them is a man named Anand John Alexander. And Anand was a rising star in the fashion industry when he was wrongfully convicted also of rape, and he was also sentenced to life in prison. He's housed in Donovan, and in addition to trying to get himself out, he's trying to get others out. And I'm going to try to share the screen here. Danny, I need you.
Hello? Hello?
Danny Silva. Okay. Well, Danny has my screen turned off, and oh, now I can do it. All right, sorry. Minor technical problems on Zoom. All right, come on. There we go. All right. Hopefully that's actually visible to people. I have like this 40-inch screen, so mine looks gigantic and maybe it looks tiny on everybody else's. Um, so, um, so he's launched this campaign, and you can go to this link if you want to see their video promo, and they have a GoFundMe. They're trying to raise this campaign. So every day, vulnerable people are dying in high-risk homeless, welfare, and prison populations across the country. These communities, undervalued by society and forgotten by the media, are being ravaged by coronavirus due to severe mismanagement, overworked staff, and a lack of basic protective equipment and cleaning products. In prisons, inmates lack access to proper masks, while staffs are entering and leaving the prison without masks. Proper questioning or testing is lacking. They're bringing the virus with them to run rampant in a tightly packed environment. So you'll notice that my virtual background here is San Quentin, where prison officials with the state themselves botched the transfer, which created an absolute travesty that has resulted so far in at least 25 incarcerated people dying in San Quentin due to mismanagement. Anand's project would enable those in prison to have a fighting chance of protecting themselves from COVID. So today we have Mark Godsey speaking. I've been on his Wrongful Convictions blog for a number of years. And in 2017, I found out that Mark Godsey was publishing a book. And being someone who's always reading, I purchased the book. And for me, at least, it was one that I couldn't put down. One of the big questions that I have never understood is how prosecutors and the police could railroad a defendant through the system. Over the years, one thing I have learned is how to really read through the BS of court cases. We go in and we sit in these court cases and we watch them. And usually I can figure out in the first opening arguments by both sides a pretty good idea if the person's simply guilty or if there's going to be a tough case. And something I think is important that a lot of people don't really understand is that if you take out the number of cases where you pretty much doubt that a crime has occurred, or you have no doubt that a crime has occurred and who committed that crime, what you're left with is an absolute terrifying realization of how often police and prosecutors simply got it wrong and the jury system didn't work. And that doesn't count the people that are forced to plead to a crime that they may not have committed because they were facing a huge exposure that they could not escape from. And so they didn't want to take a chance of having, you know, such a long sentence if they could take 5 years or 10 years instead of facing a life sentence if they actually go to court, go to trial. And so the question I think that any rational person with a brain and a sense of compassion has to ask is, how does this happen so frequently? And I think the answer here is spelled out neatly in Mark's book. And that is natural human psychology leads to one of two problems. One is tunnel vision, where you decide that the person did it and you stop looking at other factors. and the other is confirmation bias, where you look at only the facts that bolster your case and ignore those that don't. Now, before we get to Mark, I want to introduce some other folks who have some stories that they need to share. So Danny Garza was a legal observer with the Sacramento chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. And at the recent protest in Sacramento, dressed in a green legal observer cap, a police officer pointed his gun and fired a rubber bullet at him, striking him in the head. He's the vice president of the board of directors at the National Lawyers Guild, which is one of our big sponsors and partners with our Court Watch. So I want to welcome Danny Garza.
Thank you. I had a PowerPoint to go with what I'm going to talk about. Can we get that up, or can I screen share?
Yeah, hold on. So here is that.
All right. Yeah, my name's Danny Garza. I'm going to talk about what happened when I was shot, show you the video, and then show what the methods and tools are of police accountability that we have right now to use, how I'm using that in my present case, how it's ineffective, and which path we should go to move forward. And I'm still suffering from a concussion, so excuse me if I have any pauses in my speech or if I stop or get confused. I'm still having significant problems with my brain from the shot to the head. Could we go to the next slide, David? All right, so as David said, I'm the current vice president and a founding member of the Sacramento chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. I started my activism and my role in social justice at Occupy Wall Street in New York City. I was one of the original organizers there. I was there on day one. I was a legal observer at Standing Rock, among many, many other actions. I've been arrested numerous times being out there. I'm a Navy veteran. I served 6 years in the US Navy. I did 2 deployments on the USS Nimitz. When I got out of the military, I became very anti-war. I'm an anti-war activist. I'm a member of About Face, formerly known as Iraq Vets Against the War. That inspired me to seek law as a profession. I got my bachelor's degree in legal studies from Chapman University. I got my law degree from Lincoln Law School, and I currently work at a civil rights law firm here in Sacramento where we specifically handle police excessive force cases. So that's what I do for a living. Then we'll go to the next slide. All right, so I want to talk about who NLG is and what legal observers do, just for anybody who doesn't have any background on who we are. We place human rights over property interests. That's our main theme at the NLG. We are the nation's oldest and largest progressive bar association and one of the first to be racially integrated. We've been at the front lines of every major progressive change since 1937, including the civil rights movement, the LGBT rights movement, right now with Black Lives Matter, and everything in between. And we are internationally recognized. Our green hats, which you're gonna see a picture of here in a little bit, our green hats are internationally recognized by numerous governments around the world as a symbol of justice. They know who the green hats are, and we are respected, and the work we do is respected. So that's why it was so surprising and so egregious to have officers in the United States, and I wasn't the only one who was attacked. All over the country, our legal observers were attacked and arrested. And it's just, it makes it even more egregious that countries that we consider, or our government considers intolerable, intolerant and against justice, they respect us a lot more than our own country. Things the NLG does, we give Know Your Rights training in communities, for communities and organizations. We do the legal observing. We wear the bright, ugly green hats you see at every protest. We do mass defense when large numbers of people are arrested, like the 84 people arrested in East Sacramento during the Stephon Clark protests. We have member attorneys who provide pro bono legal services. We do jail support for activists who are in jail. We have international, I guess, clubs that focus on different human rights issues. For example, things going on in Venezuela or Palestine. And we do ballot observing in different countries to make sure they're having fair elections. So that kind of gives you a large picture of what we do. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide. I don't know who's controlling it. All right, so here are the pictures of the wound, the top two pictures, probably 10 minutes after I was shot. The bottom right picture, probably a few minutes. Could you go back one more? This is right there. So that green hat, that's the green hat I was wearing. And the police know who we are. They know what we're doing there. And I'm going to show you the video right now of what happened. I kind of want to give you a quick overview of what happened so you know what you're looking at. On May 31st, the president of the Sacramento chapter of NLG, Liz Kim, and I were legal observing during the protests. We were behind the police lines. They forced us to be in front of them in the line of fire, despite our initial objections. Someone, about a half hour later, someone threw a water bottle at the police line. I was about 30 feet in front of them, and I had a camera in each hand. I was wearing a green hat. I was wearing a gas mask because they were shooting tear gas at us. And they shot me in the face from 30 feet away, knowing there's no way I could have thrown anything. I have a green hat. I'm a non-participant. I have the same rights to be there and film as the press does. So it was really surprising when they shot me. I was wearing a gas mask at the time, and where the projectile hit me right here, there's actually two layers because it folds over to form the seal, and then it comes out in front to actually form the mask. And it hit me right in that spot. So there's two layers of rubber where it hit me. And that likely saved me from having my skull fractured. Another person who was shot right before I actually helped drag him off the street. They had their skull cracked and their jaw broken from these projectiles. So I'm very lucky I was wearing that gas mask. After the initial shock of being shot in the face, I returned to the front lines to identify the officer that I believe shot me. If we go to the next slide and press play on that video, we'll be able to see everything I described in a short video. You might want to enable your sound, whoever is controlling this.
I'm not with them. I don't want to be behind you. I'm not interfering. I'm not interfering. Sir, what's your badge number? You hit me in the head. What's your badge number? Hey, what's your badge number? Excuse me, with the rifle. What's your badge number? You, what's your badge number? One more time. 1011, thank you.
All right, can we go to the next slide? All right, so a couple of things I want to mention there. The words "I'm not interfering" are very powerful words when you're filming the police. As someone who does this a lot as a legal observer, please remember those words. I'm not interfering. I'm not interfering. I'm not interfering. You could see I went and identified the officer. That was just pure training kicking in, because I do these Know Your Rights classes. I always teach to identify the officer that hits you or attacks you. Shortly after this, I was unable to speak. I was unable to remember my phone number, remember my birthday. You could see in my eyes that I wasn't okay. Something was just, I was very distant in my eyes, that you could see in that video. And over 2 months later, I'm still severely affected by this concussion. And it's taken over my life, and I can't do anything. I actually designed this PowerPoint more for me than for you, so I can keep track of what I want to talk about. So shortly after that footage, street medics took me away, around the corner, away from police lines, to give me first aid. And a few minutes later, while they're bandaging up my head, the officers came around the corner and started shooting at us with flashbang grenades, pepper balls, and rubber bullets. The nurse who was helping me jumped on my body and covered my body with hers, and she got pelted with pepper balls and was temporarily blinded by them. We were yelling, medics, medics, stop shooting, and they continued to shoot at us. They would pause, we were hiding behind stairs, and when we thought it was okay to leave, they'd start shooting at us again. I don't remember how we got out of there. We eventually did, and I was taken to the Sacramento Veterans Affairs Hospital. Next slide. So I want to talk about the 3 ways to hold police accountable. And I want to give you the real world example of what I'm doing, and how I'm doing this and how I'm following this and how it's inadequate and what needs to change. So there's 3 different levels of accountability. You have your administrative, which is internal affairs. You have your civil courts, civil rights, and criminal courts. Those are the 3 ways you can get justice. Next slide. So here is a quick screen grab of part of my complaint to Internal Affairs, where I try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. It was a citizen's complaint, which goes to Internal Affairs for them to investigate administratively. And I also asked for the arrest of the officer within the same complaint. So those are 2 of the prongs I was talking about earlier, administrative and criminal. This was filed on June 29th. I requested the arrest of the officer. I asked for the documentation and manuals for the weapons used against me. I asked for policies and general orders that were omitted from their transparency website. To date, I haven't received any response from the city or the police department. So I do need a follow-up. I haven't had the cognitive ability to really retain any memories until very recently. So it's something that I need to do that I haven't been able to. But you could see some of the criminal allegations that I'm alleging here. Everything from mayhem, which is the legal term for disfiguring somebody, is mayhem. Torture, false imprisonment, assault and battery. Big ones are battery causing serious bodily injury. That's a felony. So this is ongoing, but I just wanted to show you that example. Can we go to the next slide? We also filed a class action civil rights case in federal court. This is going to be amended soon to include our state claims. There's some statutory stuff that goes on in California where we need to wait a little bit. So those are going to be added very soon. We're in the preliminary stages of this litigation and it's ongoing, but the class is going to be other people who were shot with these projectiles, which there are numerous. We have numerous people who have contacted our office, some with very significant injuries, some requiring surgery, cracked skulls, broken jaws, people getting shot in the back of the head. The pictures and videos we have from this same night of action is very gory. It's very violent. And we couldn't let it stand. So that's the civil case. Next slide. And this kind of concludes my story, and we're gonna go on to some to talking about what to do about it. So my symptoms, inability to process the passing of time. This has been the biggest one for me. Minutes, hours, days, weeks, months don't make sense to me. Every day feels like I'm within a week of being shot in the head. I never remember today's date. I don't know what day of the week it is. I had to really stare at my phone intently just to make this meeting, because if I let time get away from me, hours will pass without me knowing. I have almost no short-term memory. I frequently panic and I forget where I am, how I got there. I can't focus on anything. Dizziness, I stumble. Sensory overload's a big one, especially with this heat. Heat and light really make my brain feel like it's on fire. I have not gotten medical care to date. I was shot on May 31st. The VA has set my first doctor's appointment for October 1st. I went to the UC Davis ER last weekend, and this was the first chance I was able to actually speak to a doctor. I've contacted Representative Matsui's office and hope they can assist me get a faster appointment at the VA. But who knows? I'm still working on trying to get help. But that kind of concludes where I am with my case, and we can go to the next slide. One more back. I think you did 2 slides there. Is this it? Yeah, okay, never mind, I'm sorry. There we are. So the internal affairs system, what's wrong with it? Of course, it's an obvious conflict of interest. Police departments are investigating themselves to see if they did anything wrong. And it's kind of silly that we still allow that to happen. Investigations are kept secret. And when we do get them through discovery and legal cases, they're usually kept under protective orders, meaning we can't share them and we have to destroy them once the case is concluded. In some cases, we try to fight those protective orders. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. In California, we have the Police Officers Bill of Rights, which states that IA records are purged after 5 years. So anything more than 5 years old, nobody knows about. That gets deleted, no one can hear about it. We have a revolving door of bad officers. If an officer is fired or if they quit because they're about to be fired, they go to the department right next door and they get hired like nothing happened. And that's an issue. We have these officers just going from department to department to department to department. And from what I've seen working in civil rights and writing and submitting numerous of these citizens complaints to internal affairs, the way this works is they don't have a problem punishing an officer for coming in late or taking too long for lunch or things like that. But when it comes to a complaint from civilians against officers, they really try to shield them. They try to shield their officers from external complaints coming into the department. And that's where things get really, like, you know. One idea that's been passed around through civil rights attorneys that hasn't really gained a lot of traction, I don't know why, but police licensing. Attorneys are licensed, doctors are licensed, barbers are licensed, yet the person or the people we put in charge to enforce the law on the street and to carry weapons, they're not licensed. There's some general requirements they need, but nothing's like really universal. Departments generally can pick their own requirements. But with what police licensing would do would provide a centralized investigations that are external from the police department. And if you mess up, just like a doctor or lawyer, your license gets pulled or it could be suspended. And guess what? You can't go to the next department because you no longer have that license. Just like attorney misconduct is placed on our profiles at the state bar, misconduct should be public information for police officers. Why is that not public information? It really needs to be. IA records need to be maintained. And just as the state bar acts as a consumer protection for people hiring attorneys, we need some kind of consumer protection from our own officers. It just makes sense. And it solves a lot of the issues we have with corruption in policing, to have them licensed, to have them regulated, to have them held accountable. Next slide. So the other issue, now we're talking about civil courts and civil rights. We have an issue with qualified immunity. This is a legal doctrine that requires that a court previously clearly established that an action is unconstitutional. And if there isn't a clear-cut case on point, they will say you cannot sue this officer because they didn't know it was against the Constitution to do this. And it's absolutely ridiculous. It's silly. The cases that are coming out right now are silly. The Supreme Court has never gone against qualified immunity. And it's growing into I'm forgetting the word, I'm sorry, forgive me, but a pure immunity, not a qualified immunity, but an immunity. I'm forgetting the word right now, I apologize.
Absolute
immunity, thank you. Thank
no
you very
problem.
much. I don't know who that was, but he came in with the same. Oh, okay, thank you, Chris. So yes, we need to end qualified immunity. Another thing we need to do is require each officer to carry professional liability insurance, because right now their judgments against them are paid from insurance pools or taxpayer funds. They don't pay a penny. When we sue somebody for civil rights, when we sue an officer for killing somebody's family member unjustifiably, they don't pay a penny of that. They don't see anything come out their check. They go on with their lives like nothing happened. Who pays for it? The taxpayers. So there's no justice in civil rights either. All we do is get the family money, and that's not justice. And judgments, I think a judgment against officers should be attached to their record and publicly available. Generally, that's not the case. There's no place where you can go to look up an officer's misconduct. Next slide. Now the criminal court, there's a very close relationship with the district attorney's office, and that creates an obvious conflict of interest. Because district attorneys rarely pursue charges against police officers. They're on the same team. And there's been cases where a district attorney does file charges against an officer, and there's almost like a mutiny in the police department with working with the district attorney's office because they feel betrayed. So that's why they don't like to do that. So in having police licensing, that licensing commission should have the ability to pursue criminal charges against police officers as well. That's another idea that needs to happen. It needs to go outside the district attorney's office, because having them be the arbiters of who's going to be indicted, it just doesn't make any sense the way we have it set up right now. And just like us, the indictment is important, even if they're innocent, because they arrest us all the time and we need to prove our innocence. If they did nothing wrong, they have nothing to worry about. That's what they tell us, right? You did nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Why are they scared of going to court? Next slide. So this is just a quick talk. I just wanted to cover some quick points. But we need police licensing. Every state should have their own licensing, just like we do with doctors and the state bar for every state. We need police licensing in every state. It'll close the revolving door of officers, bad officers going from department to department. It would give another way to prosecute officers in criminal court. They need professional liability insurance, just like doctors and lawyers do. We need to end qualified immunity and make discipline records public. I think if we followed this path, it would lead to a lot more fair system in law enforcement. Next slide. That's it for my talk. That's my email address if anybody wants to contact me. And if anybody has wants any more information about the National Lawyers Guild, or wants to schedule a Know Your Rights training, or wants to give another organization our information for a Know Your Rights training, for legal observing, for anything you need from us, you can go to our website. You can contact me as well through that website. And it looks like there's a lot of comments that I missed. I don't know if there's any questions in there. But I'll go ahead and pass it back to David.
Thank you, Danny. All right. So that was Danny Garza from the National Lawyers Guild talking about his horrific ordeal not that long ago, a couple months ago. So now I want to introduce last year's keynote speaker, Jeffrey Deskovic. He was just 16 when he was wrong, but he got out while he was a relatively young man and was able to get schooling. And this year he passed the bar and became an attorney. He also took his compensation and used it to create the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation, which helps to free the innocent. And he's going to give a brief talk today.
Thank you very much, David. Just a quick sound check again, make sure no technical glitches. Everyone can hear me?
We're good.
Okay, great. So as David mentioned, I served 16 years in prison in New York State. I was arrested when I was 16 years old. I was 17 by the time the trial rolled around, and I was wrongfully convicted of murder and rape. Despite a pre-trial negative DNA test result, my wrongful conviction was caused by a coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender, I was given a 15 to life sentence because I had been charged as an adult, and that was therefore sent to a men's maximum security prison. I lost all 7 of my appeals. I got turned down for parole. Ultimately, I was exonerated through further DNA testing with the help of the Innocence Project, which not only reaffirmed the prior DNA test result and exonerated me, but also identified the actual perpetrator who had who, having been left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and had 2 children. I believe my place in the world is to fight wrongful conviction. So I've dedicated my life to that. Been an individual advocate for about 5 years. And then I was compensated, as David mentioned. I started the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, and we've been able to free 7 people who were wrongfully imprisoned in 7 years. And we helped to pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction, specifically identification reform, DNA database expansion, and videotaping of interrogations. I'm an advisory board member of the coalition group It Can Happen to You, which originated in New York. We passed the first oversight board for prosecutors called the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. We passed a tweak the same, and then in working in further coalition, we were able to help pass discovery law reform. So we're, in terms of the coalition group, it and my organization, we're working in several other states, not just New York. We are working in Pennsylvania, and perhaps more relevantly, we're also working in California, where our focus is going to be, again, passing the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct in California, just oversight for prosecutors, and also capital punishment. So just to tarry a bit on both of those topics, while police reform has correctly come to the forefront now in light of the George Floyd murder and also police brutality, and we absolutely need to help reform the police system, improve policing, get rid of the bad apples. It's not a few, by the way. If it was a few, then we wouldn't have so many instances of unjustifiable deadly police force. We wouldn't have police brutality. We certainly wouldn't have all these wrongful convictions. It's important that we not lose sight of the prosecutors. And when I say the prosecutors and the police, I'm just talking about the bad ones in the profession. There is no issue as to honest police officers doing their job by the book, nor of prosecutors. But we need to keep in mind when thinking about oversight that it's the prosecutors that decline to prosecute the police when they engage in unjustifiable deadly police force, when they engage in brutality, when they obtain evidence in violation of our Fourth Amendments. It's them who prosecute victims of police brutality, who've been charged with assaulting an officer to help the officers get away with their crimes. They're the ones who often use identification evidence, although it's suggestive. They utilize confessions that have really clear red flags around them. That's what happened to me. In my case, that was the only piece of evidence that the police have. So towards addressing that, the goal is to pass the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct, so an independent oversight board that would have subpoena power that could investigate allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. So the way the system is now, the prosecutors, they have what's called immunity, so you can't sue them in court. Although California is ahead of the rest of the country in terms of having as an E felony when they withhold evidence, no one's being prosecuted out there for it. So the commission, we see the commission as working hand in glove with that statute that's already on the books. So it's important to understand what our motivation is in doing that. In terms of capital punishment, many arguments against the death penalty. Perhaps the one that's winning that's winning in many states where capital punishment is being abolished is the innocence argument. I mean, capital punishment obviously risks the execution of innocent people. California, there's people on death row. Kevin Cooper's been waiting for a long time on death row simply to get DNA testing. On October 9th, we are having a virtual. It can happen to you with the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation. We're going to be having a virtual event October 9th, the summit. We are hoping to continue to build our coalition. The coalition is made up of exonerees, people falsely accused but acquitted, criminal justice reform organizations, individual advocates, friends and family of people who allege they're wrongfully imprisoned, formerly incarcerated people, and just everyday concerned citizens. So our tent's pretty big. Working in coalition, we get a consensus. There's everyone can participate to the level that they're able to, and in more meaningful ways sometimes than is possible just through the nonprofit model, where pretty much you just have to be a volunteer there, but the organizations have limited capacity to do that. So we give a home for everybody to come to. The era of going it alone, which was the case for quite a long time. I mean, that's proven to mostly be ineffective in coming together and working together, focusing in on one or two issues that we work on collectively, where we get consensus. And then as far as all the other issues that we're all individual organizations are pushing, just supporting each other in that, just through memos of support, issues like that. So, I mean, you think about when it comes to wrongful conviction, there's many elements of the system that are working together. It starts on the police level, the prosecutorial level, judicial level. I mean, very seldom do judges keep out coerced false confessions or identifications that are made under suggestive conditions. The appellate judges are not very good at catching and correcting wrongful convictions. If they were, the average length of wrongful imprisonment wouldn't be 14 years. It wouldn't be the case that by the time most people are exonerated, their appeals have long since been exhausted. And when you look at the case narratives in cases that have ended in exoneration, when you go to the National Registry of Exoneration, when you go to the Innocence Project and you read the case history, what happened in the case prior to that defining moment that resulted in exoneration, you see that there were plenty of red flags along the way, plenty of places where these injustices could have been could have been stopped at any number of junctions, including the appellate level. So, there is the judicial complicity in that, the maddening focus by many judges on proceduralism rather than substantive justice. What I mean by that is I lost my habeas corpus petition because my lawyer was given the wrong information on the filing procedure, which resulted in my petition arriving 4 days late. And the court viewed that as more important, and I lost my case over my innocence argument, which included the DNA. Lastly, we can't leave out that bad lawyering is a major cause of wrongful conviction. And I think that a lot of public defenders start out with really noble intentions, but to be honest, they get worn down by really large caseloads. It's not an even playing field between their office and the district attorney's office in terms of manpower, in terms of financial resources, in terms of investigatory ability, access to experts. And some of the public defenders, they're really not very good. I mean, that's why they're not in public practice. Now, there also are good attorneys there, but I think that they get worn down, some of them, and there isn't but much time to focus. If you think about one public defender representing 100 people at a time, I mean, people have gone to college. Could you handle 10 classes at once? Could you handle 100? I mean, I know I can't. I have a law degree. I have a master's before that. There's no way I could handle 100 courses, much less 100 cases where someone's life is at stake. So I guess my point in saying that is many aspects of the system breaking down, working together, not able to do their job. And as a result of that, injustices happen. And we all need to work together on any level that we can, different forms of advocacy. And so with that, I'm going to sign off. I'm really proud to be associated with Davis Vanguard. I was the keynote speaker last year. We continue to work with them the last year. I want to plug the series that Davis Vanguard has been featuring, the series Looking Back, where articles that I've written years before, originally with the Westchester Guardian, the Davis Vanguard has been publishing them weekly. And those articles apply nationally as well as in California, not simply in New York where I was there. So look, court watching is very important. I'm really excited about tonight's event. I mean, Mark is like incredible. The Ohio Innocence Project, they win a lot, man. It's so hard to achieve an exoneration. So many parts of the system working against you. So I'm happy to have played my part, and looking forward to continuing to work with the Vanguard this year. And listen, probably until I drop dead, David. Okay, so you're stuck with me. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and I really appreciate the time that I was given to add a little bit to tonight's event.
Thanks, Jeff. That was Jeffrey Deskovic. Just briefly, want to mention that the Vanguard is a 501c3, and we rely heavily not only on these events to pay our bills, but also on monthly subscribers. We have a daily newsletter, Everyday Injustice, that brings you our daily news and exclusive commentary. And we also rely on people who make monthly donations. We have set the standard at $10 a month, but we have some people that go up as high as $100 or even $300 a month, and some people that can only afford $3 or $5. And the great thing is it all adds up. So I put a couple links here in the chat that didn't come out. I'll try it again. A link to our newsletter and a link to our monthly contribution page. And anyone who's interested can sign up and check us out. In addition, I want to quickly thank a whole bunch of people that made this event possible, and also the daily operation of the Vanguard possible. So first of all, we had 60 sponsors for this event. We showed them at the beginning, and we have them on our website. But really want to thank everybody who has come in and sponsored the event. In addition, I want to thank the hard work of Danny Silva, who spent a year as our assistant director up until June. She's now going off to law school in a few weeks in San Francisco, but we're really happy with all her work for us, and we're really pleased she came back to help put this event together. I'd also like to thank Michelle Lagos, who's been working with me. We've built up an army of interns, literally 60 to 70 interns, and a lot of that is through her hard work. And she really helped to put this on. Our board, I know there are several board members here from the Vanguard, and I also need to give special thanks to Chris Vellucci, who has taken it upon himself to edit the intern articles every morning. He does 4 or 5 every day, so that is a big task, and thank you, Chris, for all of your hard work. I saw Jaku Wilson from the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. Last year, the Vanguard and the San Francisco Public Defender's Office started partnering on a court watch project in San Francisco. And in that year's time, we've done some amazing things, and Jaku is an amazing individual, and my heart goes out to him. He's fighting to get 2 of his brothers out of harm's way in prison. So just tremendous amount of work to be done all the way around. And finally, I want to thank my wife, Cecilia, my daughter, Jasmine, my son Jeremiah, my son Malachi, who's not doing too well right now, but we love him. Thank you for all your guys' support. You know, this is not a 9-to-5 job, and so there is no way that any of this could happen without the support of my family. With that said, I want to move on with our program. So when I read the book Blind Injustice by Mark Godsey, I was absolutely blown away by the book, and I was absolutely committed to the idea of bringing Mark to Davis to one of the events. I got close, but he didn't quite get to Davis this year thanks to COVID. Nevertheless, the first 2 years I attempted, we weren't able to make it happen. But when Mark contacted me in December and wanted to come out this summer, I was really excited, even more excited by the prospect of UC Davis sponsoring and allowing us to have this event at their conference center. Unfortunately, we had COVID hit, but fortunately, technology has saved us here. So now I want to show a video about the East Cleveland 3. It's the wrongful conviction of Laurice Glover, one of our speakers tonight, and his two best childhood friends, Eugene Johnson and Derek Wheat. Mark will talk about the video, and then he'll introduce Laurice for a continued discussion. This video is going to set the stage for that discussion. So let's test our technology once again.
Yeah, closed the door. There were multiple police cars.
But then I looked up the street, and it was coming from up the street too. So
You know, we both like, we ain't.
David, we can hear it, but can't see it.
Ay, ay, ay.
I was confused.
I was wondering about that. Okay. Aye. Okay, so the screen share didn't work. There we go.
Closed the door.
There we go.
There were.
Are we good?
Police cars.
Yep.
We're good.
Okay, thank you.
Then I looked up the street, and it was coming from up the street too. So
You know, we both like, we're not wanted. We don't have any drugs.
I was confused of why that many cars was coming.
They swarm on us, separate us, cuff us up, and they don't even tell us what they're arrested for.
They handcuffed me and Derek, put us in separate cars.
And I looked up, went to my seat. That was like one of the last that I had heard that night when I was before I had went to jail. I got a phone call. Derek father he was arrested. Telling me to go up there and talk. So I didn't know at the time what was really going on. So when I went up there to speak with him, he said, I said, around the corner, I'm like, oh yeah, I was in the truck.
David, you can't really hear it. Do you want me to try to share it on my end? David?
I'm unable to hear anything.
Yeah, I mean, I have it here. I can try to share it. If it doesn't
That would
work,
be astounding, yes.
yeah, but I don't know how we get his down.
Yeah, oh, shoot, neither do I.
You have to stop share.
Yeah,
It's a work in progress, right?
David, yours isn't working, so you got to stop sharing. I'm going to try it on my end.
Yeah. Mark, I just sent him a message and asked him if you can share from your end. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and stop sharing on your end.
Also, you're muted, David.
Okay, sorry about that.
For
All
me,
right.
it says host has disabled participant screen sharing. So it's not allowing me to share.
So let's see here. Hold on. I will switch it over to you.
Somebody said share the YouTube link, but it's a MP4. It's not a YouTube link.
Okay, so I've made you the host, Mark.
Okay, so share screen. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right, let me start it and see if I can maximize it. Can you hear? Well, this is the end. Hold on.
Yes,
I get out and
Yeah.
close the door. I look to my left.
much better.
Multiple police cars coming. But then I looked up the street, and they was coming from up the street too. So we both like, we're not wanted. We don't have any drugs. We don't have any weapons. I was confused of why that many cars was coming. They swarm on us, separate us, cuff us up, and they don't even tell us what they arrest us for. They handcuffed me and Derek, put us in separate cars. And I looked up in the window and I seen my mother looking out the window. And that was like one of the last images that I had her that night when I was before I went to jail. I got a phone call from Derek's father saying that they was arrested. He was telling me to come up there and talk to him. So I didn't know at the time what was really going on. So when I went up there to speak with him, he was saying something about some shooting happened around the corner. I'm like, oh yeah, I was in the truck with them, and we saw the shooting. And first he was saying that, well, we talked to your friend Derek, and that's not what he said. They was telling me that they had 30 witnesses. Yeah, 15 eyewitnesses that was putting us at the scene and said that we had killed the guy. Yeah, that's when they try to make it seem like they had witnesses against me, saying I shot somebody. Saying Reese and G was saying totally different things, saying that it was me and everything like that. And I just kept telling them what I knew. First thing that morning, they drove us and shipped us down to juvenile detention center. Me and Jay was 17, and Reese was 16.
The state's case of trial was two things. There's the testimony of Tamika Harris, who was the 14-year-old girl who said that she'd seen the shooter coming from behind Larissa's truck. And that it was also gunshot residue that they had supposedly pulled from both the outside of the truck and from Derek's sleeve and one of Eugene's gloves. Whenever you fire a gun, there is what's called primer that ignites the gunpowder. That primer is made up of elements you don't see very often in nature: antimony, barium, and lead, and they're fused together as part of the process of firing a round. Guns are not airtight, so when you shoot a weapon, the primer from that gunshot residue will come out through various places in the gun and will oftentimes end up on the person's hands, where it can then be recovered and confirmed as being gunshot residue. So on the day of the shooting, Tamika says that she identifies Eugene as being, of the 3 people in the car, only the person whose clothes were the closest to the person that she saw that day. Initially, that was all she said. And in fact, when she was asked at first whether she could identify the shooter, she noted that she wasn't wearing her glasses. She couldn't really see the person's face, but she sort of generally described the clothing the person was wearing as a dark blue jacket. So at trial, there are really 2 pieces of evidence against the 3 defendants. Tamika Harris, her identification of Eugene Johnson, and this gunshot residue, or what they said was gunshot residue that they supposedly found on the car and on Derek Wheat and on one of Eugene Johnson's gloves. When the state rested, they actually made a plea offer to Derek and Larice.
They came to me, they said, if you testify, say that Eugene did it, you will serve 6 months and get probation. And they told, Larice if he testified against Eugene, that he would just walk because he had no record.
Telling me if you testify on Eugene, they said they would let you go home today. So I'm like, no, I can't do that because, we innocent.
The plea offer signifies that the state knew that their case was weak. They knew that they didn't have much of a case, and they knew that they needed more in order to get a conviction.
Like, why would I do that? Tell you something, testify against somebody that's not the truth. So we never did. We never took that deal.
Both of them insisted they were innocent. They both refused to take the plea deal, and it went on to the jury.
I always thought that all of this would get corrected on appeal, and once the appeal went through, we'd get out. That never happened. We went through appeal after appeal, and 1 and 2 years turned into 5 years. 5 years turned to 10 years. And I don't know, it just started looking bad.
They had us going to solitary confinement every year when a crime, allegedly happened. We supposed to think about what we supposedly done. To be locked up for something you didn't do, every year gotta go to solitary confinement. I think that was kind of like my darkest moment. In 2004, I think that was kind of the first kind of door opener when the state witness recanted.
She started thinking about the evolution of her testimony. She started thinking about what she actually saw that day. And she felt, I think, guilty about having exaggerated her testimony at the time of trial. She said that she felt pressured by police. It's understandable. She was 14 years old. She's trying to do the right thing. She has police and prosecutors telling her this is the right thing to do. She has police and prosecutors saying, we found the car that the shooters came from. We found the 3 guys. Which of these 3 is it? They were never asking her questions about whether she was sure that this was the shooter. It was building up her testimony as much as possible. And she responded to that pressure.
So the Judge Russo granted me a new trial, so the prosecutor appealed to the appellate courts and they overturned it. They were basically saying that the state could have still got a conviction based on the gunshot residue.
There was a study done in California where when you take random people from the street swab their hands, confirm that there's no gunshot residue on them. And then you put them in the back of a squad car and drive them around for half an hour, let them out, and then swab them again. You had up to 1 out of 3 of those people end up testing positive for gunshot residue. And the reason being, of course, because the back of police cars are lousy with it, right? And gunshot residue is not something that is like glue. It's a light powder. It's going to, if it's on you, it's going to maybe transfer and get on other surfaces that you're interacting with. So when we started looking into the gunshot residue evidence and find all of these problems, the hope is that that's going to be enough to show that the conviction really, there's not any more support for it. Tamika Harris is recanted. The gunshot residue evidence has serious, serious flaws. These men should not be in prison for this. Ultimately, the appeals based on the gunshot residue evidence problems were unsuccessful.
That was another tough situation, but you know, you just have to believe in God and just, you know, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You know, you just gotta keep going, and that's what I did.
Yeah, that was like real difficult, and I don't know, you just had to have faith.
In 2013, an attorney with OIP, Kerry Wood, filed a public records request and specifically requested the police file from East Cleveland Police Department, where the detectives kept notes of all their interviews and everything they had done with the initial investigation. When we got back the public records request, on the very first page was a letter from the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office
Dated from 1998. And it basically said, like, you guys released this, you're going to be prosecuted, you ordered this, and everything you got pertaining to this case to our office.
Apparently, one of the defendant's original attorneys had also requested public records back in the late 90s. And in response to that, the East Cleveland Police Department was ready to turn over those records.
It is public records. Anybody can go view anything about anybody's case. Once the case is over, it's public records. Anybody can see it.
There were multiple things that the police had known in 1995 and 1996 that had never been turned over to the defense. Maybe the most important thing that the police knew back then and never disclosed was there were 2 additional witnesses who were on the scene when the shooting occurred. Not only did these 2 new witnesses see that the shooter didn't come from the truck, but they actually claimed that they recognized the shooter as the older brother of one of their classmates.
He had seen what happened, and he thinks the shooter is a girl, his class brother. He's seen them before.
There's no question that the information in the police records would have severely damaged the state's case. The state's case was so weak that they're offering 2 out of 3 defendants a complete walk if they'll testify against the shooter. And here in their file is evidence that basically it completely exonerates all 3 men. And they hid it. And that's unconstitutional. There's a case called Brady that requires the state to turn over evidence that is exculpatory and could be material to the defense. In January 2019, a trial court declared that they were actually innocent, and at that point, the case was over.
They always fought for us, and so, you know, it's like a debt of gratitude to the Ohio Innocence Project that is so humongous. I don't even have words to explain it.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
David, can you stick me up first? I'm going to talk a little bit, then introduce Larice.
You got to switch me back to the host.
How do I do that?
If you go under participants,
Yep.
and then my name, and then more.
Make host.
Yep.
Okay, I just did it.
All right. Do you want me? Do you want to be in the spotlight, or you want Larice in the spotlight?
I'll be for now. I'm going to talk a little while, then I'll introduce Larice.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, can you guys see me? Am I the main attraction now? So first of all, thank you all for having me as the keynote speaker this year. I would love to have been there in California, but I'm glad that everybody's doing this in a way to keep everyone safe. And I just want to start off by saying that I appreciate everybody here supporting the Davis Vanguard. I hope that you'll continue to do so in the future because, you know, as an Innocence Project, we're looking at things many years after the fact. And if we want to change the system, what we need is people on the ground observing the court system, pointing out these errors early on. And so this is extremely important, particularly with the decline of investigative journalism we've seen in the past couple of decades. I mean, when I started this work 20 years ago, you could go to the local newspaper, you could find investigative journalists who would dig into these cases. And sadly, that has been erased. And so it's going to be organizations like the Davis Vanguard who are stepping up and filling that void. Extremely, extremely important. So I'm really honored to be here today to support it. So as David mentioned, I wrote a book, Blind Injustice, and what it's about, it goes into all the causes of wrongful conviction, but it's really sort of a memoir. One thing David didn't mention is that I used to be a prosecutor. And that was where all of my court experience was. And I had a very sort of hard-nosed prosecutorial attitude. I eventually, after doing that for about 7 years, wanted to go into academia and be a law professor. And the first school where I got a job had an Innocence Project. And the guy who ran it, the professor who ran it, was on sabbatical that year. And I'm like the new professor, I don't have tenure. And the dean comes to me and says, you got all this criminal investigation background, you're going to supervise the Innocence Project this year. And I remember just thinking like, oh my God, this is total bullshit. You know, there's no innocent people in prison. Here I've got all these awards on my professor office as a prosecutor. And I remember going to the first meeting, and there were students who had just gotten back from visiting this guy named Herman May in prison, and they were going on and on about he was innocent. And I remember grilling them about the case. And it was a rape case, and the victim identified him, and she had been 100% certain he was the perpetrator. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, this is just complete BS. I mean, these students are just bleeding heart, gullible kids. And long story short, we did DNA testing, and it proved him innocent and identified the true perpetrator. So it was a moment of completely having to eat crow. And it was extremely eye-opening. And so the first chapter of the book is called Eye Opener. It's about that experience. And as I supervised the Innocence Project that year, of course, I went to the national conference and I met exonerees from all around the country. And by the end of the year, I realized that there's serious problems in our criminal justice system. And I had been in hardcore denial about it. And in fact, then I went to the University of Cincinnati the next year, my home state and my home city. Ohio was the largest state that didn't have an Innocence Project. So I founded the Innocence Project there in 2003. So in 1 year, I'd become a convert. We've now been in operation for 17 years. The video said we freed 28. We've now freed 30 who served 600 years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. We just had 2 more released during COVID. But you know, throughout this time, I'm seeing how prosecutors behave and how police behave, and I'm reflecting back on my time as a prosecutor, the attitudes that I saw, my own personal attitude, and the point is to sort of compare and contrast in memoir fashion. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. A couple of things I want to point out first about the video, and I'm going to use that video and the East Cleveland 3 case to highlight some points before I turn to Larice. But you know, Danny mentioned in his talk about how the system doesn't really offer incentives to correct police officers and to make them perform and function more fairly. And one of the things he mentioned that it's very hard to sue them in civil court. And there's qualified immunity and everything else. And you know, in Larissa's case, Derek, Larissa, and Eugene, they were able to get past qualified immunity and get a federal court to award each of them $5 million against the East Cleveland city, which to date, they haven't paid a dime because they're bankrupt. So that's another problem, that even if you get all through all those hurdles, you may not win. And another one of our clients sued the city of Cleveland and won $13.2 million. His name is David Ayers, and they've wiggled and done everything they can. It's been almost a decade and they still haven't paid a dime of it. So I just want to echo that. And I think the East Cleveland 3 case emphasizes that even more. But, you know, one of the things that was completely shocking to me once I had this conversion, I started doing innocence cases, is how the system just simply refuses to admit that it's made mistakes. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll get into, but the very first case I had, we had DNA evidence conclusively proving the individual innocent. And I went to court thinking, you know, this is going to be easy. And the prosecution came up with these ridiculous theories. It was a Clarence Elkins case, and there was a grandmother there was a home invasion in the middle of the night. She was raped and murdered, and her 6-year-old granddaughter was spending the night, and the perpetrator had attacked her as well. And we found DNA in the vaginal cavity of the grandmother and on the panties of the little girl. It was the same man on both victims, and it didn't match Clarence Elkins. And so there's only one man whose DNA can be in both of those places on the night of the attack, and that's the perpetrator, and it wasn't Clarence Elkins. We went to court, and the prosecutor came up with this theory that, well, the DNA must not be from the attacker because Clarence is clearly guilty. So what must have happened is that the grandmother, earlier in the day she was murdered, had some sort of contact with a man and heavy handshaking or something, and his DNA rubbed off on her hands. And then she helped the girl go to the bathroom, and that's how the man's DNA rubbed off on the little girl's panties, even though the girl was 6 years old, wouldn't need help going to the bathroom. Then the grandmother masturbated and rubbed the DNA of the man off into her vaginal cavity. So that something like that is clearly what happened here. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, am I on Mars? Like, you know, this is absolutely insane. And believe it or not, the court accepted that theory, and we lost the case. And it was only because we were able to track down the real perpetrator and get his DNA and match it to that crime scene evidence that Clarence was ultimately exonerated. And I kept seeing this in case after case, these just crazy theories and unable to accept the truth. I also started looking back on, you know, the causes of wrongful convictions and things that I did as a prosecutor. I'm going to quickly go through some of the leading causes. False confessions, you know, somebody who's innocent that ends up confessing to a crime they didn't commit, and Jeffrey Deskovic, who spoke earlier, is a perfect example of that. Incentivized witnesses, we often call them snitches. I use a snitch in almost every single case, and there's absolutely no oversight. You saw in the video, they came and offered you, Derek and Larice, basically to walk. They offered Derek 6 months and Larice to walk if they would flip and testify against Eugene because their case was so weak. What was unusual about that is that these guys did not take that deal. And that shows to their incredible character that they did not take that deal. Most people do. Trust me, as a prosecutor, you have incredible leverage, and you can get people to say anything you want them to say when they're looking at life for 10 or 20 years, and all they have to do is tell a lie to help the prosecution. Another is unreliable forensics. The East Cleveland 3 case is a perfect example of that. Brian, who's an attorney that works for me, he was the attorney in the video, talked about how, you know, they convict all these people on gunshot residue for decades. There's probably thousands of people in prison on gunshot residue. And nobody thinks the fact that, well, when you arrest somebody and put them in a police car and take them down and handcuff them to an interrogation desk, they're around gunshot residue and it's going to get all over them. And the studies show that, like as Brian said in one study, 1/3 of the people who are clean before they start that process end up with gunshot residue on them. And you know, you can look at the National Academy of Sciences report. It talks about the flaws in the forensics that we use across the board. Crazy thing is we've got these TV shows like CSI that hold up the forensics as, you know, equivalent of some modern day miracle, like putting man on the moon. And when you really study it, they're extremely unreliable and lead to wrongful convictions. Eyewitness misidentification. You know, in the East Cleveland 3 case, they got the 14-year-old girl to evolve her testimony from starting off saying, well, Eugene's jacket looks the most like the jacket that the perpetrator was wearing, to by the time she testifies, positively identifying him. I got to tell you, when I was a prosecutor, we get witnesses in, and I was told at the beginning, it's your job to make these witnesses, quote, come to Jesus. That they're going to start off being all wishy-washy on you, or they're going to be lying because they don't want to get involved. And you got to sort of like pressure them and grill them to get to the truth, because you're the prosecutor, you got the file and you know the truth. And so you would move these witnesses to be more favorable to the case. And that's all behind closed doors, right? It's not recorded. The defense attorney doesn't get a tape of that to point that out afterwards. So witness misidentification is a major problem. You've got the problems with the imbalance in the system, that the public defenders and defense attorneys don't have near the resources. They don't have all the bells and whistles like, investigators that can go out and hit the streets, interviewing witnesses, or, CSI department. Most of the time they can't even get expert witnesses. They have to apply to the court for funds. So it's a system that is in severe need of reform. For all of these different points, there are fixes. And the system has been very, very, very slow to change, even with all these wrongful convictions continuing. One of the biggest problems is, in my opinion, is the election of judges and prosecutors. And starting with the election between the first Bush and Dukakis all the way back, I think it was in 1980, where Dukakis had been governor and he had let Willie Horton out on one of these like parole type things. And while he was out, he committed a crime. And then Bush used the soft on crime label against Dukakis, which caused him to lose the presidential election. And this really was an important sort of pop culture or cultural moment where you saw everyone take this sort of tough on crime stance, and people who were running for judge or prosecutors, regardless of they're Democrats or Republicans, didn't want any soundbite out there in their next election where they could be painted as soft on crime. And that, combined with the fact that there's really no oversight for prosecutors and judges, just sort of fueled this tough on crime mentality that we saw in both political parties. And it's still there today. I mean, people who particularly sort of came to their political positions at that time period in the 90s or early 2000s, they were sort of groomed on that theory. So, when I was in the prosecutor's office, there was never, ever any concept that somebody could be innocent. I mean, it wasn't even in the vocabulary. To the extent we discussed the weaknesses in our case, it was only to have somebody play devil's advocate so we could come up with clever ways to rebut that in court. And one of the stories I tell in Blind Injustice is that, the more evidence of innocence existed in a given case, the more the prosecutor wanted to win it. Because then you look like some wizard who pulled some, magic rabbit out of a hat, that you're some superstar, that you were able to win this tough case. It made you look even better. And in my office, there was a sort of an urban legend that this guy who had been there years before me, this prosecutor named Schmidt, would go around before every trial going, "Oh my God, there's so much evidence of innocence. I don't know how I'm going to win this." And he would whine and whine about it and exaggerate how weak the case was, so that when he won, he would look really good. And it became like this phrase that if anybody sort of started saying that, they go, "I'll quit schmitting your case." Right? But it just proves the point of how when there's evidence of innocence, when the case is weak, a prosecutor looks better when they win. And so the culture in these offices is not one that you would expect in law school when you're sitting back and being reflective on what's the right thing, stepping back, what's the objective right answer. It's competitive. It's how do I win? It's what do I do to make this come out in my favor? You saw that in the East Cleveland 3 case. The way they manipulated the evidence, but also I just want to emphasize, if you didn't pick up what happened in the video, we eventually won the case because of a Brady violation. And to just add some additional facts, these guys, the East Cleveland 3, after they were convicted, started sending public records requests to the police department repeatedly, saying, "We want the police file." And it was ignored for about 20 years. And at the Innocence Project, we started sending public records requests and they were ignored year after year. And one of the things we've learned is that if you send enough public records requests, at some point you're going to get an intern who's working there who opens the mail and isn't part of the conspiracy, doesn't know what's going on. So they just go innocently go copy the file and mail it off. And I think that's honestly what eventually happened in this case. And when we got the public records, not only did it say that there were 2 witnesses who got a much better view, who didn't have a problem like Tamika Harris because she wasn't even wearing her glasses, and they were able to identify that the guy came from the post office, walked behind their car and shot the guy on the street, but they knew who he was. Worse than that, also buried in the police records were the fact that this victim, the guy who was shot and killed, there was somebody trying to kill him. And there had been a drive-by shooting the week before where they missed. And the victim was with his brother that day, and the police went and showed the East Cleveland 3 picture in their car to him, and he said, no, that's not the guys that was trying to shoot my brother. And so the prosecutor stood up in the East Cleveland 3's trial and closing arguments and said, we can't prove a motive for the East Cleveland 3, why they wanted to kill this guy, but we don't have to prove a motive. The whole time they were hiding in their file the fact that somebody else did have a motive, and that was never turned over to the defense. So worse than that, as the video pointed out, when the first public records request came in shortly after their conviction, the East Cleveland Police Department asked the prosecutor's office, what should we do with this? And the prosecutor's office sent a letter back saying, never turn this over. And if you do, you might be prosecuted. You police officers might be prosecuted. And whoever turned over the public records request to us finally after 20 years had that letter, the smoking gun, right on top. And it was the very first thing we saw when we opened the public records. So that was enough to allow us to finally win the case. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. So I'm going to have Larice join us now. I think, Larice, you're on the screen, right? Does everybody can see Larice? And we're just going to do this through conversation, and people can ask questions through me or through David, or I want to turn your speaker off if you want your mic on and ask a question. But I want to start off by asking you your views of the criminal justice system before this happened, and what you believed was going to happen when you were arrested.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say my views as far as the judicial system, I was a kid, so I always thought that, the truth will set you free. Growing up, I always thought the police was to protect and serve, and when all of this happened to us, I just knew that, everything would work itself out because we was innocent. And that didn't happen. And, it took us 20 long years to fight to get our freedom back. So, what's the second part of your question, Mark?
Well, I'll just ask you, like, when you turned down that deal, what were you thinking? Were you thinking you were going to get acquitted at that point? And so why would you take that deal?
I honestly didn't know, because during the trial, like, it was so many crazy events happening, like with the jury. The jury was saying, like, they fear for their life from us. And, our lawyers tried to declare for a mistrial because the jury said they fear for their life, and the judge denied it. So it was that going on, and the judge had told us, like, if you out and you see a jury, you better just walk out of the place and go the other way. And I don't know, that just kind of had me scared. And then with the lawyers coming to us, asking us, would we be willing to take a plea bargain? We were so naive to the system, like we had never been in that situation before. So in my head, I was thinking that the lawyers didn't believe in us. That's why they was coming to us with the plea bargain. But I didn't know, that if it's presented, they supposed to bring it to us. So like I said, we was kids. So I was just so naive about the system. I didn't know. I just thought, even our own lawyers don't believe in us.
Talk about, I've heard you say this before, your lowest point in prison during the 20 years.
Yeah, my lowest point in prison would have to be, it was in 2011. I was due to go back up for parole. I was going on 16 years. And at that time, our case, we was trying to see if we was going to get our case heard in the Supreme Court. And so I went to the hole because somebody had sent some marijuana in the car to me and two other guys that I knew. And in prison, like, every piece of mail, from people that send you letters to legal mail to anything, it's like cut open. They search it. So, it was obvious that whoever had done that to us, they had a motive to do that to us. They wanted us to go to the hole and ultimately probably get our status raised. So I'm in the hole for something I didn't do. I'm in prison for something I didn't do. So that was just like a double whammy. And we're waiting to get our case, see if the Supreme Court gonna hear our case. So at that point, it had got denied while I was in the hole. And then we had outside counsel, Jones Day, working with you guys on the case. And after the Supreme Court refused to hear our case. Jones Day dropped the case, said there's nothing else they can do. So it was just like, it's like everything was just going bad. And then I was supposed to go up for parole, and I was in the hole. So they was talking about raising my status to a maximum security and sending me to Lucasville. So I know with that being done, like, it was no way possible that I could even be considered for parole, because I was in the hole for a rules infraction and I was getting my status raised to a higher level. So it just, at that point, like, I felt hopeless. And I had never felt hopeless my whole time being in prison until that moment. And at that time, I had a cousin from Columbus that I hadn't heard from probably since I was like 14 years old. And she just wrote me out the blue. And, she was asking me how I was doing, and I explained my situation, what was going on. And she just started sending me like Bible scriptures every day sending me Bible scriptures. And in the whole, you can get like one visit a month. So she used to come down there and visit me for the one visit a month. And I never wanted my people to ever come see me when I was in the hole, because when you go to the hole, when you go to a visit from the hole, you got shackles on, and you're handcuffed with the chain around your waist. And I just never wanted my people to see me like that. But at that time, with her sending me them Bible scriptures and coming to see me, it just gave me hope and a sense of faith again, and it helped lift me back up. And like, I always, like, still today, I still reach out to her, and I always talk about that moment when she came into my life and just helped put that spark back in me. But that was like the lowest point that I ever felt during that whole time. And we done got appeal after appeal denied, but always was gonna keep fighting. But at that point, like, it just seemed like everything was just tumbling down on me, and it's just like, I don't know, my spirit was almost broke at that moment.
Can you talk about what role do you believe, first of all, do you believe race played a role in your wrongful conviction and the time it took to get you out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about that.
And I say that because of where we come from. We come from East Cleveland. And I don't know if a lot of people on here is familiar with East Cleveland, but like, East Cleveland is like one of the poorest cities in Cleveland. And I believe that every detective that was involved in our case, they just figured that if they done this to us, it could just get swept under the rug. We wasn't gonna fight. But luckily from us, that we came from big families, and our families always supported us. Our community supported us. Like, every time that we ever got granted any type of court hearing, like, we had the whole community at court, like, trying to get in the courtroom. And a lot of times the hallways was filled up. Like, so I don't think that they thought that we was gonna actually have as many people behind us fighting for us like we did. So I definitely believe race played a factor in our case.
I know at about 10 minutes, David wanted us to open up to questions from people who are participating. Can you talk about the adjustment after you've been released? So you've been out about 5 years now, is it? Or 6?
Yeah, a little over 5.
A little over 5. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Ohio Innocence Project, we have a therapist who works on PTSD with our exonerees, and our group of 30 exonerees are a pretty tight family. But one of the things I think that they have in common is that almost everybody comes out with some form of PTSD. Can you talk about the struggles to adjust in the past 5 years?
Well, my struggles, like, I still have them today. Like, so I still attend our regular PTSD meetings with Donna and the other exonerees, and we usually try to do that at least once or twice a month. So I'm still attending that. And right now, I'm in the process of, I'm talking to like 2 different therapists, one from Cleveland Clinic and one from Metro. And I'm just trying to narrow it down to which one I feel the most comfortable with, to see which one I'm gonna stick with. But I think 2 of my biggest things since I've been free, I saw that, like, when I was in prison, some days, like, I just woke up and just was angry at my surroundings, like, just the noise constantly every day. And, I used to just go into shutdown mode. Like, the guys that I normally would kick it with every day, like, I wouldn't want to talk to them. I just wanted to be by myself. And them being around me for so long and knew my situation, and they understood it. So they can tell when I'm in one of those modes, and, you know, they'll just let me be until I come around. So like that was one of my biggest things. And like sometimes I find like the smallest things like have me upset when it shouldn't even be that serious. So that's my whole point of really still try to go back to this counseling, you know, and still attending the PTSD meetings with Donna, because I'm trying to get a hold of that situation. Because like just recently, like I saw in the relationship I was in, me waking up in the moods, like I was taking it out with the girlfriend that I had at the time. And I saw it, but I couldn't control it. So like I'm in a bad mood, and then I act a certain way toward her, and that wasn't fair to her. You know, so that's the reason, like today, you know, me and her, we just recently split up like a couple months ago. And it was hard because the breakup was mainly because of the different things that I suffered from. But I don't think it was fair that she had to be on the back end of it because I couldn't control it. So I just had to take this time to try to figure it out and try to get myself together before I could actually be able to commit to somebody else. Because if I ain't no good to myself, I can't be no good to nobody else. And it's hard for her and it was hard for me, but I think that was just the best thing for us to do at this moment.
Thank you, Larice. What have you been doing, spending your time since you've been out? Like, what are sort of the things that you've enjoyed doing?
Well, this is like my passion now, like going to speak about wrongful convictions. And like the people that know me never in a million years would ever think that I'd be doing something like this. I was like the shy person growing up. So like to be able to speak in front of a crowd, like I didn't ever think I would be able to do it, let alone like the people that know me that I grew up around. But, and I know this is not for everybody either though, but I find it to be therapeutical for me. And I feel like with me doing this and me giving somebody else a sense of hope, or me being able to, you know, talk to the youth and maybe get them to pursue a career in law enforcement, or you know, judge or prosecutor, and for them to know what happens. Like how you said, like you went in as a prosecutor, you know, you get that tunnel vision, like everybody is guilty. So just to, you know, go talk to them before they even get in that field and let them know that, you know, this do happen. So, you know, have an open mind if that's the career you choose to take.
Yeah, and for everybody out there, I mean, Larice has been doing a ton of speaking. Obviously, COVID has slowed that down. But about this time last year, he spoke to the convention of all the trial court judges in Ohio, and he had them in tears. I mean, that was a pretty remarkable scenario when they're standing up and passing the microphone around, and you have judges who are choking up, asking their questions. And so that's the sort of thing that we've got to be doing, and you're going to make a big difference in the future. David, you want to turn to questions now? Questions for me or questions for Larice?
Yeah. Why don't people put them in the chat? I think that'll be easiest, and then I can read them out to Mark and Larice. I'll ask the first question, and I always ask this question of people that have been wrongly convicted. But I mean, what were you thinking when you're getting into the prison, and you're not supposed to be there? What's going through your mind? Are you thinking you're going to get out, this is all a mistake, or what's your thought process at that point?
Yeah, I think each stage I just tried to give myself a sense of hope, like from juvenile court. We was in juvenile for like 3 months, and then they bonded us over, and then I'm thinking like, you know, okay, with the adult court, we get a jury of 12, so, you know, we got a better chance of, you know, getting proven that we was innocent and walking away from it instead of a judge just making a decision. And then that didn't happen. And then so we were like, okay, appeal, they got to get it right on appeal. and then that didn't happen. Like, so it's like you just try to give yourself a sense of hope, and you just know that God is gonna come through for you. And it was like like I say, like the years started going by. You know, them appeals be taking a year, 18 months, and 2 years for you to hear anything, and then next you know they just going by so fast. 2 turned into 5, 5 to 8 to 10. And yeah, it was a struggle, but it's like with that, just having that faith and with my guys, like, you know, one day one of us might be down, and for a nice amount of the time we was in the same prison together, but if not, like, we always kept in contact, so we always had the other one. When somebody down, you just help lift them back up.
Everybody's asking about the same question is, what can be done to bring about change? Or as one person said, how do you change the culture of prosecutor offices? This sounds like a question maybe for Mark.
Yeah, so, well, so first off, I talk about this in chapter 8 of my book. Everybody's got to realize it's a very, very slow process. And it's actually somewhat better now than it was when I first started doing this work in 2001 and then founded our Innocence Project in 2003. And I see it as a decades-long civil rights movement. And I compare it to, I don't know how many of you are as old as me, I'm in my 50s, but I mean, looking back at the issue of gay rights in the 1980s when I was in high school and college, totally different now. Not that we don't have more to go, but it wasn't one seminal moment where a lot of people's minds changed. It was education and yelling and screaming and talking and informing. These are very slow moving the boulders up the mountain. I mean, the same with marijuana. When I was in high school in the 1980s, totally different view. Now nobody cares and it's legal in some places. It's going to be legal everywhere. So you see these shifts of attitudes, and we're seeing it now. Criminal justice reform was talked about for the first time in the last presidential election, and it's going to be a big issue in this election. So for the first time, we saw a complete reform prosecutor elected in Philadelphia who ran on a sort of an innocence project, I'm going to reform everything platform, Larry Krasner. He's faced great resistance, but he's done amazing things. We're seeing reform prosecutors running all across the country. So we are seeing momentum. The cultural aspects, you know, we've got a prosecutor's office in Ohio, Columbus, Franklin County, where there's been a prosecutor there for about 30 years. And the attitude he instills in his prosecutors the correct attitude from the beginning, and he has us up to speak. He's somebody who's got no ego. He teaches it's all about, you know, not about winning, it's about doing the right thing. He encourages people when they drop charges. His name's Ron O'Brien. And when you see a leader take that position and set that sort of standard from the beginning, it trickles down through the office. So it can happen, but it's going to take people making everyone in the public aware, which is things like the Davis Vanguard are doing. It's going to take education in the classrooms. It's going to take people like Larice getting out and speaking more and more, and we push our exonerees out into the high schools and colleges. But if we continue this, we are seeing the momentum, we are seeing it grow, and we will make the change.
So a law student in California says, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Glover, for sharing your story. I believe all law students should be made aware of institutional injustices.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, I want to kind of dovetail on Mark's last point there, because, you know, I've been doing this for 15 years now, and even in that relatively short period of time, we've seen a lot of change. Like when I first started doing this, everybody thought, you know, we were crazy. Like crazy radicals trying to destroy the system. And now, you know, people are getting elected to prosecutor offices all over the country. And, you know, it's not just Philadelphia and San Francisco. I just interviewed a lady this week who won down in Tucson, Arizona. I interviewed somebody last week who won up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, somebody who won down in Austin, Texas. It's an interesting time, and they're all pushing reforms. And one of the big pieces of everybody's reform is some form of conviction integrity unit. And maybe Mark can talk about the difference between ones that work and ones that don't work.
Sure. Yeah, conviction integrity units are sort of set up to be like innocence projects inside a prosecutor's office. And there's a term that in the field called CRINO, which stands for conviction review in name only. Because there are some prosecutors who are not reform prosecutors who have realized that this is helpful to get reelected. And so they set one up, but it's all internal prosecutors and people who have been prosecutors for 20 or 30 years who had the mentality I did when I left the prosecutor's office, but they're still there. And they do very little. And so there's a think tank out of Penn Law School called the Quattrone Center. And they put out standards of conviction integrity units and exactly what procedures must be followed. And some of the key things is that you need to hire somebody from the outside, like a lifelong defense attorney who has a different filter for how they view evidence. And then you need to insulate them so that when they make a decision that, you know, we reviewed a case and we're going to overturn this conviction from 20 years ago, they have the independence to do that. Because what we've seen is in conviction integrity units, they start to make that decision, and then the prosecutors who are on the case start to push back, and it becomes a huge political fight. And many times the old line mentality wins. Those are just a few of the things. But if done correctly and all the procedures are followed, there's insulation, et cetera, they can be much more effective than an innocence project, because there's somebody, it's like an innocence project from the inside. They can get all the documents. You know, we have to fight for years to get the documents. So this is something that, if done right, is extremely effective, and you need to be looking at the prosecutors in your jurisdiction and trying to cipher through whether this is just stuff they're saying to get elected or whether they're serious about it.
Great. Other questions for Mark or Clarice? Let's see, based on your experience in the system, do you think prison actually offers individuals who are guilty of a crime the tools to change? Or do you believe alternatives to incarceration should be more often considered?
Larissa, I think that's for you.
I didn't even hear it. It was like chopped up.
I will try again. Based on your experience in the system, do you think prison actually offers individuals who are guilty of a crime the tools to change, or do you believe alternatives to incarceration should be considered more often?
I don't know. I would say it's all on the individual. Like, so with my experience in there, it's like so many different things that they recommend for you to do as far as you being guilty of the crime, for like, so different things that the parole board wants you to take up for you to be considered to get a parole. So what I took from my experience in prison, I tried to get in everything that I could possibly do to educate myself or to make me a better person that would be better for me upon me getting released. So it does nothing for you if you're innocent, because they don't think nobody in there is innocent. It's just on you what you take out of the experience. So that's where I went in. Like, going in, I was a juvenile, so it was mandatory that I had to go to high school. But once you turn 18, you can just sign yourself out. But like, why would I do that? I might as well get as much education as I can. So, you know, I did the schooling, I did the trades, I did the different programs that would help me, like with the parenting programs and I still did take up a couple different programs that I knew that the parole board would look at, because that was still an option that I had to that route I had to take if the judicial system didn't work out for me. But and then that turned out to be a bad thing too, though, because with the parole board, they expect you to. Their main thing is for you to take responsibility for your actions, and that's you going in there admitting guilt. And that was something I wasn't willing to do. So I never went in there and told them whatever they wanted to hear. You know, I told them I was innocent. And they always kept saying, like, well, we have to go off of what the paperwork say. And, like, my first time going up for parole, I took them people 11 years, and they gave me 5 years. And I did the 5 years. So the next time I went up, you know, I was trying to explain to a lady on the board that, you know, I told her, like, I got 16 years in right now. Like, I wouldn't still be coming in here telling you that I was innocent if I wasn't innocent. And she told me, well, I got people that come in here after 30 years and still say they're innocent. And at that point, like, I knew I was in a losing battle. So, you know, I didn't speak no more. And they told me to step out the room. And when I came back in, they gave me 4 more years. Like, these are people I wish I could see today, because I wouldn't know what would they have to say to this, though, you know? Like, you passing out all of this time to me, and you want me to come in here and tell you something that I didn't do. You want me to just make up something. And there still was no guarantee that they was going to give me a parole if I went in there and said whatever they wanted me to say, you know? So I had to just still hold on to my integrity throughout that situation. But them people I would love to sit down with face to face to just, you know, hear their response to, you know, why they went upon it, how they went upon it.
Somebody wants to know if you met other inmates while in prison who had been wrongly convicted.
Oh, yeah. I mean, several of the exonerees, you know, that Ohio Innocence Project helped release. These are people I knew in prison, you know, and we was friends in prison, and we still friends outside of prison. So, yeah, it's a few.
I'm going to interject a quick. Can you talk about the importance of the exoneree family?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I had met several of the exonerees once we was released, and the ones that I did meet, I never knew them in prison. I didn't know them only from seeing a couple of them on the news once they was released. But the love and support that they showed us once we was released, it was like we knew each other our whole lives. And the different things we was faced with as far as like with jobs and, you know, just adapting to society. Like, I reached out to a few of them so many times, like, and they gave me some of the best advice ever. And it meant a lot to me because, you know, they had walked in my shoes before I walked in them. So with that being said, like, you know, we don't even all get together a lot. Like the ones in Cleveland, I see a few of them on a regular basis, but a few of the others that's like in Cincinnati and Columbus and Dayton and all them different places, like once we get together, you would think we talk and hang out every day. Like, the love is just genuine. And, you know, I'm forever grateful to have them guys in my corner and be able to reach out to them and talk to them when I need advice and vice versa. So that bond is like, it's forever. I don't think it'll ever be broke.
Another person writes, Mr. Glover, words cannot describe how bad I feel for what you went through. So happy that you are out. If you had a magic wand, is there any laws you would like to see changed? Your case had Brady violations, lying witnesses, and police, and so on.
I don't know. I think the biggest thing with me is, with our case in them early stages, the prosecutor meet with the defense attorneys, and you just read off what you got. You read it down, they take notes. That's unacceptable. I feel that both sides should get everything, and you should be able to look at it. Not you just read me what you feel is important to me, and I take notes. Like, your client is fighting for his life, and you and the prosecutor side is fighting to win the case. Like, that should never happen like that. I feel like both sides should be able to see everything right in front of them, and you take what you need, and you take what you need, and you go from there. Not how that procedure was going back then. I think that's a big reason why there's so many people that's wrongfully convicted, because, you know, the prosecutor, they live for the conviction. They'll do anything to get the conviction. So I don't believe they ever will all just tell you everything that they got to help you out with your case. I doubt that.
Mark, somebody wants to know what's your opinion on I guess the quality of DA offices training on Brady.
Basically, maybe there's some that are changing now, but there's essentially no training on Brady. And I wasn't trained on Brady. And the only thing I was trained about Brady was to violate it. And I tell this story in my book. So as a prosecutor, I would often participate in the witness interviews. And they would bring witnesses in, particularly if they have attorneys, and I would be there with the FBI agent or whoever. And I told you already that we were sort of trained to bring them to Jesus and get their story to be most conforming to our theory of the case. And you would often see witnesses sort of change their story in the 2 hours we had them in the room. And again, I was told, oh, this is what you got to do, because everybody's going to start off lying, and you know the truth because you've got the file. So there's this sort of belief that we know everything. But I remember in my very first one, the witness came in and started giving us her explanation of what happened, and I was writing it down. And the senior prosecutor said, don't write it down. You'll have to turn that over to the defense attorney. And that was basically instructed to wait until you get the final story that you want, and then take notes at the end, because that's what you have to turn over. And so when you work a witness through, and there's some witnesses that don't change their story no matter how much you sort of grill them, but it's very common that they will, and this gets into a lot of different subjects, and I have a whole chapter on malleable memory. You can convince people through your questioning, where by the end of it they're like, yeah, I think you're right, probably the game was over by the time he left, and then you just erase the person's alibi. They started off giving you a statement that would have confirmed the alibi, and you sort of changed the timeline by the end through the grilling. And so I was basically told, don't keep track and don't memorialize, don't write down that evolution of testimony, because the witness will get torn to shred on the stands later. So I was basically instructed to violate the Constitution. And I put in my book some stats about that's very common in prosecutors' offices. That's the only training I got.
And somebody else just said, I was told the very same thing by now a sitting judge when I was the DA. So, I always wonder, my view of these cases, and I'll see what you think about this, Mark, since you've had all this experience, is that, there's a certain amount of cases where you kind of know what happened, you know what who did it, and it's not really in question. But it seems to me that once it gets more complicated and you have to actually sort through conflicting stories, that it's almost a crapshoot as to whether or not you guys get it right. I mean, is that your sense, or?
Well, yeah, and
am I too cynical?
No, I mean, there are a lot of cases that we pass off the prosecutor's theory, and all it is their spin on the evidence, and that satisfies proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I don't want to take up too much time with the story, but I'll tell one as a prosecutor that I think solidifies this, and I go into detail in my book. I had a case where the victim was a very famous professional athlete, all-star. I won't even say what sport. And the crime was that what they called the towel boy, allegedly stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from him. And the defense was that I was basically his personal concierge, and he gave me this money as my payment, right? And the defense lawyer came in and said, look, this is actually a true story. And he would go buy these things, and he would buy items. He would make sure the beer is in the fridge after every game, and blah, 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 blah. And this was a professional athlete who was young and a millionaire and just flew by the seat of his pants and overpaid this guy. And right before trial started, I ended up finally getting all the bank records, and I found out that this guy had been buying all sorts of things for the professional athlete, which sort of confirmed his story. And so I would remember it was just like a shot in the gut because the trial was getting ready to start. And I thought, and then it finally dawned on me you know what? These were expenditures he was making, not legitimately, but just to see if he could use the credit card and write a check and it would make it through the bank. So they were test expenditures. And this was a theory I just came up with, like literally on the eve of trial. And so there was no way to know actually which story was true. I went to court, I presented my theory, and the jury believed me. And as I talk about in the book, in a lot of these close cases, we don't really know what happened. And the jury believed my theory of it, but it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't know if I explained that very well, but it's explained in the book in the chapter on tunnel vision. And there's so many cases are like that. Really, it's just whose spin on conflicting evidence, on unclear evidence do you actually believe?
Other questions, people? Like talking to my intern.
David, can you hear me? Hi.
Yeah, go for it.
I was wondering if so first I would like to thank all the guests. My name is Anjem Vondo. I sit on the board of the Vanguard. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take this long. My question, first I want to thank you for all the suggestions that you shared in regard to the changes that are needed with the police force and the prosecution system. And I'm very interested in it because the Police Accountability Committee, I'm engaged in talk with the city and then our mayor is here, I think. Now you can see me, sorry about that. To try to make some change happen also on that end, keep the police accountable, the prosecution system, but also the system needs to change. My question is for Mark, for Larice, for Danny. I was wondering if you can share, if you know of any resources that can be used nationwide, because I feel like from what I've read here and there, the work that you're doing, what we're trying to make happen in Davis is happening in several other cities. But my concern is that it's, it's happening here and there, and I'm hoping to see all that social change movement catch up nationwide as well. Like I feel like the prosecution system as an institution needs to be changed everywhere, right? And same goes with the police force and the way it works. So my question to you is what can we do to make sure that the work that you're all doing and what we're doing happens on a national level? I hope my question isn't too confusing.
I mean, I understood your question.
Thank
I
you.
just don't have an easy answer. The only answer I have is, like every other civil rights movement that takes decades, it succeeds if you never take your foot off the gas and keep educating and pressuring and pushing. And as my exoneree friend Dean Gillespie always says, yelling and screaming. And you can never let go once you get to the top of the mountain. The fight for justice is never going to end. It's not like you win. And so, even with civil rights movements that have had some success, it wasn't all even, like it happened evenly in all parts of the country. And it's not like we've won the civil rights movements from the 1960s. Things are better in some respects and not in other ways. And we're seeing it regress in some ways. So, one of the things I've noticed is that people who are on the front line, some will get burnt out and quit because the success isn't quick enough. But that's the wrong attitude. We're never gonna win. All we can do is have incremental improvements, and that fight is worthy.
I think that's a good answer there. Bunch more questions just came in. This one's for Larice. Did you find anyone on the inside, administrators or guards, who were sympathetic to you?
I wouldn't say, because there's I didn't never share my story with no administrator or no guards or different things like that, because at the end of the day, like, they gonna still treat you just the inmate in there to them. So I never really shared my story with none of the staff in there, and it was only with different guys that was in there that I really felt that I could trust.
Okay. This is for Mark. They want to know if you are more supportive of a reformist movement or an abolitionist movement. Which is better to proceed?
I mean, you're talking about like completely abolishing police departments?
Yeah, or even prosecutor offices, I suppose.
I mean, I'm for reform. You know, it's all terminology. I would like to see them completely different. I'd like to see the prosecutors' offices run like Larry Krasner. I mean, I think we can make the change. I mean, I think law enforcement serves an important purpose. But I mean, we've just gone so far astray. And anytime you give people so much power, which the law enforcement in our country has right now, they're so militarized and there's no oversight and there's qualified immunity. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So we can see how we've gotten to this point. But I think law enforcement done correctly serves an important purpose. And so I would like shifting resources. I would like massive training. I would like to reform. That's just my personal opinion.
How can someone entering the DA's office try to make a difference? Is it even possible?
You know, Professor Paul Butler wrote a book called The Hip Hop Theory of Justice, where he had been a prosecutor. And when he got out and went into academia, he sort of looked back on his time and he thought he sold out. And the gist of it, I debated him once, the gist of it was sort of like, you can't become a prosecutor because you can't do it the right way. It's so, the system's so corrupted. I don't totally agree with that. I mean, I just think it's very hard to do it and do it right, but we're never going to change it unless we get people in there. You know, there were some areas that I had the right mentality on. The one area that I had the right mentality on is that I was totally against the war on drugs. I thought it was complete bullshit. And I thought the mandatory minimums were insane. And I kept it to myself, and I was Robin Hood. And so when I had one of those cases, I would understate the amount of drugs so I get people out from under the mandatory minimums. And I would do things which a hardcore prosecutor would call cheating to create justice. And maybe somebody would say that's not right. But that's what I did. I mean, and there were other areas where I'm not proud of how I acted. But I mean, I think you can go in and you can fight to keep the mentality you had going in, and you can say, I'm going to do the things I need to do, and I'm going to win at the margins, and I'm going to try to be one of these people who changes. I don't know how else you're going to do it.
Another abolition question. They want to know if you, actually it's for Larice. Do you think prisons should be abolished?
Oh man. Yeah, I wouldn't say all that. Like, you know, it's still got to be a line, and I don't. You know, after going through what I went through, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But you know, at the same time, like, it's certain people that need to be in there as well, though. So. Yeah, I don't think I would cross that line to say all of that.
All right. Let's see.
Well, just to say there is a lot more to that question, and I'll skip some of the middle of it, but where I got to at the end is, at least if we're not going to abolish prisons, how can we make them less traumatizing environments for people and make them more rehabilitative? And also, do you know if there's any efforts to end solitary confinement, if there's legislation or large movements around that happening right now?
Larice, I can start off if that's okay, then you can add your 2 cents on it. I always tell my criminal law students, you know, I've been to most of the prisons in Ohio, and I can tell what decade they were built in by the quote at the front. There's always some sort of quote. And if you go back to the ones that were made in 1900 or 1920, they have quotes that are sort of like, he who enters here, do not hang your head. You know, you will be rehabilitated and you will re-enter society a better person, and that's our goal. And then as you go through the decades, that theme is really lost. And I always tell my students, you know, we don't build more prisons now, we just pack more people into the ones we have. But if we built one now, it would just have a middle finger and it would just say, fuck you. Because all we've done, and we've completely ended that mentality. I remember sitting, waiting to testify in the Ohio Senate on a bill, and the bill that was up before me had a representative testifying. It was to end all these programs in the prison. And he was saying, how can somebody get college for free inside a prison when we got this, you know, single mom on the outside who hasn't done anything wrong, who can't afford college, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a bill to just sort of try to end more things in prison. Yeah, I think there should be major changes in the prison system. Obviously, our prison sentences are way out of whack, and they're way longer than they need to be. But I would go back to the mentality of the 1920s of really focusing on rehabilitation.
And this is another kind of reform question aimed at prosecutors. They're talking about the recruiting of prosecutors. And is there a way they recruit prosecutors, or are they just kind of taking the people coming out of law school who want to be prosecutors?
The way it works in a lot of counties is it's a patronage job. You know, again, if you asked Larice this question, but if it was asked to me, what's the one thing you'd change? I would change for prosecutors and judges not being elected to some sort of insulated merit system like they have in some, because that just politicizes everything. But in my county, in Cincinnati, it's largely a patronage job. And so it's the people who come from the families that donated big to the prosecutor and the Republican Party who get the jobs, and it just feeds the whole mentality. And I say in my county it's Republican, but be absolutely clear here. The Democrats traditionally are just as bad or worse on all of these issues. And in my state, the counties that are the hardest to deal with are the blue Democratic counties. And my view is that, you know, Bill Clinton came out and said, after the whole Deskovic thing that we talked about earlier, you know, we're going to out tough on crime the Republicans. And he did some horrible, you know, he was in favor of the 3 strikes and the crime bill of 1996, which really limited habeas, just horrible things. And it really set the tone for the Democratic Party for decades, which we're just now coming out of. And so in the 20 years I've been doing this, I've always viewed Democrats in my state as having a chip on their shoulder of trying to being really insecure about their crime cred. So they really try to act tough on crime. Whereas Republicans tend to get a benefit of the doubt on crime from voters. And so when I'm sitting in a legislator's office, I tend to have a more reasonable discussion with Republicans than I do with Democrats. And I tend to have better experiences with Republican prosecutors than I do with Democratic prosecutors. I'm overgeneralizing here. I think that trend is changing, the pendulum swinging the other way. But I pointed out my local county as being difficult and being Republican. I wanted to make sure everybody understands that they've got to fix the Democratic Party as well.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, my experience over the last year, I've met with quite a few Democratic legislators in California, and I imagine California is a little different anyway than Ohio. But you know, there's definitely a strong core of reform-minded Democrats in the legislature out here, anyway.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's changing. But yeah, especially 15 years ago, if you were a Democrat, you had to be super tough on crime. You followed Clinton's model.
Somebody asked, whatever happened to rehabilitation and anti-recidivism programs, defunded or lack of will on the part of the system?
Both. Lack of will, and it's this tough on crime mentality that really started with Nixon, but then really fed up, got steam after the election in 1980, continued and now swinging finally the other way just in the past 4 or 5 years, took with it that whole mentality. I mean, nobody could say anything that could be painted on softest crime.
All right. I think we're just about out of questions here. I think we could probably wrap up at this point. Did you want to make a few closing remarks?
For me, I'll just say, thank you everybody for being here, but most importantly, thank you for supporting Davis Vanguard. I can't emphasize enough, the longer I've done this, the more I realize the change is going to come through education, through court watching, and through spreading the word at a grassroots level. There needs to be Davis Vanguards in every jurisdiction, and this is sort of like a trailblazing organization, and by making this one strong, it's going to help it spread this entire notion. Thank you, David. Thank you for the staff for everything you do. Extremely honored to be able to here to support you tonight.
And thank you for, well, not coming out here, but hanging with us through our COVID roller coaster ride out here. And thank you, Laurice, for coming on and sharing your story. I think you really impacted a lot of people, and hopefully you will continue to do so. And I know Danny Garza is going to leave in a second, but thank you for coming on and sharing your story. You know, we saw that when it happened, and it's just kind of appalling what's taken place in the last couple of months with respect to law enforcement taking shots at legal observers and journalists. You know, journalists have to be on the front line of democracy, otherwise nobody knows what's going on. And that's actually one of you know, our mission statements from the Court Watch Project, is that nobody knows what's going on in the court system because it's not on television most of the time, and the newspapers are not covering this stuff. And we, you know, over the last 10 years, we've covered cases where we believe the wrong people have been convicted, and we've covered cases where we've seen people that were clearly innocent and they got acquitted because they had strong lawyers, and there are good public defenders out there that have fought really hard to get people acquitted, even though they don't have the resource advantage of some of the prosecutor offices. Some of these public defender offices are being outspent 10 to 1. Sometimes it's even higher. We've seen cases where, you know, their public defenders, 100 is actually a reasonable number compared to some of the numbers that we've seen out there. So I want to wrap up and thank everybody for coming out. You know, what Mark said is absolutely true. What the Vanguard is doing is really on the cutting edge, and there's actually nobody else doing what we're doing. The blending of journalism with court watching and being able to actually report and get out there what's going on in the criminal legal system. So I want to thank everybody. I'm going to post one more time our links. People can sign up for the newsletter. If they're feeling generous, they can sign up to be a monthly subscriber. You know, even $3, $3 a month. You know, if we had 1,000 people commit to $3 a month, that's one more person we could hire, and that's one more area that we could cover. So thank you, everybody, and be safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll see you in the future.
It's like watching dominoes fall.